Okay, so let's take a look at the Celestron StarSense DX130AZ telescope, the latest in their line to integrate a phone with your telescope. I've been getting a lot of requests to review this model and finally did get my hands on one. Club member has this one and loaned it to me. So let's check it out. Okay, so if you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Ed Ting, and I've done hundreds of telescope reviews, both online and in print, for the past 25 years. I live in a house with, at last count, 51 telescopes. The subject of today's review is this Celestron StarSense Explorer DX130AZ. It's kind of a long name, isn't it? Well, what is it? Well, it's an astronomical telescope designed for looking up at the night sky, and it's a reflector design. You've got a 5-inch or so mirror in the back that gathers light, puts the light into the eyepiece up here. This is where you look. This is how you focus. To change magnifications, you change eyepieces. This one comes with two eyepieces, a 25 millimeter and a 10 millimeter. These feel awfully light, but they work okay. There is, on the optical tube, a red dot reflex sight. You turn this on, it puts a red dot at infinity. If you have aligned the finder to the telescope, point the red dot finder at the point in the sky you want to look at, and it should be in the telescope. It's on what we call an alt-az mount. It's altitude azimuth. That's a fancy word that just means it goes left and right and up and down. There are slow motion controls for both axes, and as you can see, there is a tripod. Okay, so everything that I've said here so far is pretty normal for a beginner type reflecting telescope of about 5 inches or so on an alt-az mount. You see lots of these out there. What sets this one apart is the StarSense module. It's this cradle that's on the side here, and I suspect that most of you tuning in here want to know about the StarSense. So let's go ahead and take a look. What is the StarSense? Well, it's a navigational aid using your phone, like this. And like the red dot finder, which will point you to the point in the sky where you're looking, the StarSense does it with your phone. And there's a built-in atlas on this thing that you can download, and you can move around and it will show you where to go. So there's less for you to learn. Okay, so at this point, many beginners have the same few questions about the StarSense module, so I'll take a quick look at some of these and knock them down. So first of all, is the StarSense a go-to module? Like, will the telescope move to the object by itself? And the answer is no. It's just a navigational aid that points you around the night sky. This is a purely manual telescope. There are no electronics on it whatsoever, unless you want to count your phone and maybe the red dot finder. Second thing, will the StarSense show me what's in the eyepiece on my phone? Well, no, there's an atlas in here that shows you astrophotographer type photos that have been taken before, but no, this is a purely manual telescope. You look through it. There's a new breed of telescope out there called a smart telescope or an electronic telescope. Those are becoming popular as I speak, but no, this is not one of those. Third question, do I have to use the StarSense? Do I need to turn it on? No, you do not. And in fact, I didn't use the StarSense for quite a while before I turned it on, because I just wanted to get used to using the telescope first. There's no reason why you just can't use this thing by itself. Another question I get, well, why can't I just download the StarSense app and then make one of these things and stick it on one of my own telescopes? Well, you can download the StarSense app, but in order to use it, you need an activation code. And the activation code comes with the telescope. They are unique, so yeah, you have to buy the telescope. Another question I get, let's say I want to change optical tubes. I just want to try something else and keep using the StarSense. Can I do that? And the answer is yes, you can. There's a knob here that holds this on. Try to do this carefully here. But what's on here is what they call a Vixen-compatible plate. This is a standard in our industry, and many small and mid-sized telescopes do use this plate. So I just happen to have this lying around. This is an Orion Short Tube 80. You notice it has a very similar plate on it, and you can just put this on here like this and use it, the way you normally would. The StarSense and the mount do not know and do not care what telescope is on here. Okay, so let's look at the StarSense module. All right, now It's been close to a year since I played with one of these. You'll recall I did the review of the 10-inch Dobsonian model that had the StarSense on it, and I was actually a little concerned, like maybe I've forgotten a lot of this stuff, but you know, it doesn't matter because the app is very well written, I think. So the first thing you do is there's this duck-billed curved shape thing here. This is just a cover. This comes right off and it exposes the mirror underneath. The second thing you do is you take your phone, and you have to be careful how you do this, but you very carefully put it in there like that. And the reason I say this is because the axes, the XY axes here, are very loose, and if you manhandle this thing, you're going to move the thing, and if you had it aligned before, you're going to have to realign it. I've done this several times. The next thing you do is you look at the mirror, and then you move the XY axis controls here until you expose the entire camera. If your camera has one lens or two or more than one lenses, you do need to see all of the lenses in the mirror because that's how it's going to take a picture of the night sky. Okay, next step is to align the phone with the telescope. And the way that you do that, again, it walks you through the process. It tells you to pick a distant object, and it points to, let's say, the top of a tree. And it just so happens I have a tree that looks exactly like the one in the app. So let's go ahead and use that. Now you'll see that there are red crosshairs there, and the red crosshairs likely won't be completely aligned with the top of the tree, but you find the top of the tree with the telescope, and then when that's done, you drag the cross on your screen so that the cross fits the top of the tree or whatever it is you happen to be looking at. Notice the phone itself does not move at all, you're just moving the crosshairs. Once you do this, the telescope and the phone are now aligned. You can also do this at night. There is a night mode. I actually tried this at night with the same tree, as you can see here, and you can see the top of the tree is aligned with the telescope and everything is good to go. Now here comes the part that I always find fascinating. You are told to point the telescope at a relatively blank area of the sky, just where there aren't a lot of the moon or trees or things around. And then it takes a little while sometimes, but it will figure out by taking a picture of the stars in the night sky exactly where it is in on the telescope, because it will compare it to an internal database of a star atlas. Very cool. After that, it may ask you to go to one more object for precise alignment. In this case, it is Jupiter, and the arrows tell you where to go. As you get closer, it zooms in, and when you're right on the target, then it should be in the eyepiece. Let's say, for example, you want to go from Jupiter to the Pleiades, M45. If you want to look at that, which you do, by the way, if you haven't seen it before, it's a wonderful cluster. You dial in M45 or the Pleiades on the search engine, and the arrows, again, point you to the Pleiades, and hopefully when you get there, look in the eyepiece, they will be in there. Once you get there, there are a number of things you can look at, not only through the eyepiece but on the phone itself. It has a description, and you can actually hear it talk about the Pleiades if you want to.
The impression of the eye when seeing these stars. It looks to the naked eye like many open clusters do in the field of view of a telescope. Since the Pleiades are so large and clear, they are best viewed with small telescopes or binoculars. Large telescopes spoil things, and M45 can't be fitted into the narrow area of the high-powered instrument. Pleasing views are obtained in 7-power binoculars, or
So with my phone and the StarSense app, I was able to locate these objects. I'll list them on the side here. I can find a lot of that stuff myself, but it was kind of fun to see what the StarSense would do. Now, if you find that the accuracy is off, that is, it's a little bit off, which does happen from time to time, the culprit is probably in the calibration, that thing where you move the red crosshairs. Go back and do that again. I found for me it takes 2 to 3 tries when I first get one of these things in again for me to do a really accurate calibration. I've also heard from some people that there are certain late model Samsung phones that don't work with the StarSense, and I've never personally experienced that, but I've heard from enough of you that I thought I would pass that along. Okay, so hopefully I've done a decent job here of explaining the advantages, what's good about this telescope. Unfortunately, we have some problems, and some of these are pretty serious. So if you're thinking about buying one of these, you might want to stay tuned to see just how much this stuff is going to bother you. Now, those of you who know telescopes and have seen a lot of these have probably already figured out what the issue is. It's the mount. Now, some of you may have heard me say this in the past. All cheap scope problems are mount problems. It's pretty rare the optical tube is actually the issue. The problem is always with the mount. And the issue here is that this single-sided swing arm design here isn't quite strong enough to hold this thing steady. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm not really touching the tube that much, and it's moving back and forth quite a bit. So when beginners see this, they'll often ask two questions. They'll say, well, first of all, how bad is that? Well, it can be pretty annoying because if you think about it, telescopes magnify things. With the low power eyepiece in here, you're at 26 power, so all of this movement is going to get magnified 26 times. If you put the higher power eyepiece in here, this is the 10 millimeter at 65 power, and if you look through this one, now everything you're putting in here is going to get magnified around 65 times. And when this happens, very often you're not even looking at the object, you're just watching the thing jiggle back and forth. Second question I get is, well, how often am I touching it? You're doing it now, but how often do I touch it? Well, you're touching it quite a bit because if you think about it, the Earth is always rotating, therefore the stars are always moving, at least in our perception. And so you're constantly grabbing this thing and moving it. You're constantly doing this motion in the sky. So if you look at something in the eyepiece for a couple of minutes, you walk away, your friend comes over and says, hey, can I look? A lot of times it'll be off towards the edge or out of the eyepiece. You're going to have to do this again. In fact, this thing is unsteady to the point where even the act of sometimes using the focuser is enough to move it, and it can be hard to draw focus. Now, I've tried a couple of things. I've gone through this mount and I've tightened everything that I could find. I went online to see how other people are dealing with this. Some people are suggesting an old photographer's trick where you tie a sandbag or something to the bottom of the tripod to weigh it down, but that doesn't really help. The tripod itself is actually decent. It's the mount head. It's just not strong enough to hold this thing steady. So this is the kind of thing that if you're a beginner and you go out the first few nights, you're going to think, well, it's not too bad. But I've been doing this for a long time. I know it's going to irritate you long term, and this really started to bother me. Another minor thing is, as with any alt-az mount, there is a dead spot near the zenith where you can't point the telescope straight up. This varies based on the optical tube and the mount and the combination, but you can see I can't quite get to the zenith here. That may not look like a big dead spot, but it's bigger than you might think, and Murphy's Law is such that whatever you want to look at just going to have to be straight up, isn't it? And you'll notice that if your object is over here, in the legs here, your dead spot is quite a bit larger because the tube hits the legs. Now, can you just take the tripod and just shift it and move it around? Yes, you can, but you may have to realign the phone with the optical tube when you do such a thing. Also, you can use the slow motion controls to try to mitigate this motion, but I've got a couple of complaints here. So first of all, if you notice, both the slow motion controls are kind of in the same place. In the dark, it can be hard to see which one is the altitude and which one is the azimuth. And as you can see, I put a white sticker on here so I can remind myself which one is the azimuth axis. Not only that, every time you grab this thing, Murphy's Law again, you wind up turning it the wrong way. So you could wind up experimenting 2, 3, or 4 times before you get it to the point where you know exactly how to move the telescope with the slow motion controls. I didn't use these at all. I just grabbed it and moved it. Okay, so as an example, let me show you a couple of mounts with this same single-sided swing arm design that get it right. I have an Orion Versago 3 model, and I have the Vixen Porta. Now I'll show you this, but the arms here have much more metal in them, and these things are much stronger. The mount head and the tripod also weigh substantially more than the one you get with the Celestron. So yeah, let's go ahead and put it on the Porta. So this is a Japanese model, and it just goes on like this. Very similar design. Okay, now you'll notice here, I'm doing this, it's barely moving at all, and if it does move, it damps out very quickly. The other thing I want you to notice about both the Porta and the Versago is that the slow motion controls are in very different spots, so they're very easy to differentiate in the dark as opposed to this situation here. The motions are a little bit smoother as well. Now, I've said this before, but I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg argument, but I like to say that the industry has kind of abandoned us when it's come to low-cost quality alt-az mounts. Both these models, as of the time of filming, are discontinued. I hope they bring them back. I really like the Porta. It was actually quite inexpensive until the very end there, towards the end of its production run. But I like to say that the industry has abandoned us, but maybe we've abandoned the industry, because when you go out there, everybody seems to want an electronic go-to mount these days. And so maybe it's us that's not buying these things and the industry is just responding to us. But if you can find either of these mounts used, I would suggest you think about picking one up. So as another example, this is an electronic go-to mount. It's a Celestron AVX, and you can take this off of here again. Vixen compatible dovetail plate is universal, and it goes on here. Now again, if you put it on a different mount, you do lose the StarSense capability, but in the case of this model, you have the electronic go-to system. You don't need the StarSense. Also, there aren't rotating rings here. It's just a plate bolted to the bottom. Rings are nice so you can rotate the tube, but at this price point, I don't think we can complain. This is how I wound up using this optical tube most of the time. And in fact, the owner of this telescope that I borrowed it from admits that's what he does as well. He has an AVX. Just be aware these things cost over $1,000. So you know, when I do these reviews, I try not to read anything on the internet, but in this case, its reputation preceded it because a lot of you who own these things wrote me about this thing. So the complaints about the mount are pretty much universal. There's a second thing I want to draw to your attention. It's the focuser. Now, some of you say your focusers are quite nice. Others are more like this one. You know, it's got a lot of play in the tube, and in fact, you can actually grab the barrel here and move it. There's so much play in here. Now, it is theoretically possible to open this thing up and re-shim the Teflon pads with something a little bit thicker that's the appropriate thickness. In practice, I find that it's very difficult and very few people do that. Now, the other thing that is kind of strange about this focuser is there's an 1.25" adapter here, and there's a larger collar. Now, people assume that this is a 2-inch adapter for a 2-inch eyepiece. It's not. This is a strange, non-standard diameter. It's something just short of 2¼ inches. Kind of looks like a 2-inch capability, but you can't actually use it. Now, I know that maybe the weight would cause a problem with a 2-inch eyepiece. Maybe you don't get full field illumination, but I mean, you know, come on, just give us the 2-inch, just give me the option to use it. I got a letter from one user who has one of these things who didn't realize this, and his first night out with the telescope, he tried to put a 2-inch eyepiece in this focuser, and it's too big, and it actually fell in the optical tube. Yeah, we don't want that happening to you. Okay, so I'm not sure I can give an unconditional recommendation to this product. You know, beginners who write me about, you know, should I buy one of these, usually fall into one of 3 categories. Now, I'm going to go through each of these 3 categories, and I'll show you a model that I think is better than buying one of these. If you're ready to spend $500 on a telescope, you're ready to get pretty serious about the hobby, I would suggest that you get yourself a 6-inch Dobsonian reflector. Now, I've done a review on the Orion model, but you can buy any of them out there. They're all pretty much the same. These things come from the same 2 or 3 sources out of China, and they just dress them up and put different accessories on them. Get any of the 6-inch Dobs. They are all fantastic. Everything is just a little bit better. Now, you lose the StarSense, but everything else, again, like I said, is better. You get a little bit more aperture, the optics are likely to be a little bit better, and most significantly, the mount is good. A 6-inch Dobsonian is much more of a permanent telescope than one of these, and they're all highly recommended. Okay, so let's say money is your main concern. Maybe you're in the market for a $300 telescope, say, and you're wondering if you should stretch the budget and get one of these. Well, this is the category of beginner I would suggest you really don't buy one of these because the problems here are going to frustrate you and they can be expensive and difficult to fix. I'm going to suggest for you that you get one of these. It's an Orion Observer 134, and I just did a review on this one. I'll link it below. So this thing, again, everything is just a little bit better than what you see here. It's not a perfect thing. So what's happening here, you have an equatorial mount, so there is a learning curve associated with learning to use an EQ mount, but once you do learn it, that is a transferable skill that you can use to other telescopes. My major complaint about this one is this all-plastic focuser. I am concerned of that thing lasting long-term. Strangely though, the plastic focuser here I think works a little better, at least on the one that I have over here. Again, you don't get the StarSense, but everything else is just a little bit better. And the best part of all, this entire telescope only cost $249 at the time of filming. Okay, so let's say you have to have the StarSense. That is non-negotiable. It's what you want. Well, the StarSense, as of the time of filming, is a Celestron product, so we're going to stay in the Celestron line, and let's cut them a break here. I'm going to recommend for you the 8-inch Dobsonian StarSense telescope. Now, I did a review of the 10, which I liked a lot. I actually think I like the 8 a little bit better because it's a little bit more of a manageable telescope. Yes, it's $799 at the time of filming, but if you're into this thing for close to $500, I would suggest you spend the extra and just get the thing that's going to last you long term. I also do want to point out the most important things on a telescope are, number one, a solid mount, and number two, a quality optical tube. For me, the StarSense is in the category of nice to have more than it is a necessity. So you don't want the tail to wag the dog. Yes, it's nice, but have your priorities straight. Get a telescope with a good mount and a good optical tube. So again, I'm finding it hard to give an unqualified recommendation to this telescope. I don't love saying that. I think it gets a lot right. I think it's a shame that there are some flaws here with both the mount and at least the focuser on mine. So if you could give me a better product in those aspects, or if you could lower the price so I could feel a little bit better about what I'm buying, give in to me on one of those two variables. Now, if you already bought one of these things, I don't think it's the end of the world. This is a usable telescope. I just think you might be better off with one of the alternates that I listed before. Okay, so there you have it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.